Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Bessi Graham, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be with you.
It is a pleasure to be with you. I'm in the Salt Lake City area. You're joining us from Melbourne, Australia. So it's the other side of the world and the next day for you. Thank you for joining me so early in the morning, your time. Today, we're going to be talking about aligning your business strategy with your values. I think this is an incredibly important piece to effective leadership and to just navigating a career, like finding ways to make sure that there's clear alignment. So we're going to unpack this, explore this together today. As we get started, I wanted to share Bessi's bio with everybody. Bessi Graham is an award-winning entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience working with business owners, governments, and large funding bodies to bring doing good and making money back together. Bessi works with established business leaders who want to build on their success and align their company with their values, but are concerned about the impact of these changes on their bottom line. Showing them how they can do good and make money at the same time is a big part of her work. In fact, doing good is the competitive edge their business has been missing. I love that. I'm very much into that philosophy. I don't think it's an either or, it's a both and I think we do it better. We do our strategy better. We have better bottom line outcomes when we have that alignment and when we are doing good and making a positive impact in the world around us. Bessi, anything you would like to highlight by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
I think that the main pieces are there, and it sounds like we're very much on the same page around these aspects of trying to get leaders to get more comfortable with not having to pick one. The either or comment you made, I was nodding my head furiously. I think that's been one of the lies we've been fed over the last few decades in particular. So yeah, that common theme for me in all of my businesses has been around really awakening that possibility in business leaders to say, you can merge these ideas of money and meaning. It's not this zero-sum game in business, which is not only unhelpful and unsustainable, it's also just not true on how you run a really good, robust business. So keen to dig into that with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps we could start with some examples, or maybe we'll get there, but there are so many examples of companies that do both and do both very well. I think of a company like Patagonia, for example, a classic example, but there's many where having a clear meaning, purpose, and social value and impact to what you're doing doesn't, it's not just frou-frou kind of fluff, warm and fuzzies, but like it's actual strategy that helps you establish your brand, to connect with your consumers, to have better products, and ultimately to just be a better sustainable organization.
Yeah. And I think often as leaders, we forget that word sustainability also is connected to our own energy or our own momentum and motivation as an organization, because it's not sustainable to keep pushing after things if you don't actually care about them or you don't value them and you don't think that it's important. So there's so much that comes about and so much more power in the approaches of how you lead and how you run your business if you have done that work to get really clear on those pieces, which, as you said, they're not a side aspect of a nice little PR piece of what you talk about publicly in your marketing. They are actually core strategy elements of what differentiates you. How do you position yourself as an organization in a way that is true to who you are from that founder perspective all the way through to where you are today, depending on the age of your organization. But you used a beautiful example there with a group like Patagonia. And I think if we bring these ideas for everyone right back to trying to tap into our core business activities, how we run the business, Patagonia is a great example of this merging of money and meaning, or bringing together these ideas, actually being at the heart of how you make decisions strategically as an organization, and that it will look different for every business. Because I think recently when Patagonia made some big shifts around ownership, a lot of the public conversation about it missed the point, because we tend to push things into being these black or white things of, if you're a good business or you're being responsible, you will make these decisions or your business will look a certain way. You have to dig a lot deeper and really understand that for Patagonia, the right decision for them around ownership will look different for your organization based on some of those aspects of, what do you care about? What are you trying to do in the world? And the decisions that we make and how clear and able to be decisive we are comes back to how deeply rooted in what is most important to us as an organization we are as a leader. And so one of the shifts that I've seen, particularly in the last 4 years with everything that's going on with COVID, that leaders have been kind of taken off their game a little bit, because they have this identity as being decisive and, quick to make decisions, really people of strategy, and that they have clarity. And we've gone through such a rapid time of change that many haven't realized how overwhelmed and thrown off their game they have become in that period. And so shifting back into, how do I reclaim that decisiveness? How do I get clarity on the foundational elements so I can lead effectively again, is an important aspect. And I think it really does start with these conversations that we've begun to dig into around clarity on the foundational elements of things like core values, how you actually behave, and ultimately from a vision perspective, what it is you care about and want to contribute to. If you're not clear on those, reclaiming any type of decisiveness and visionary capacity as a leader within the crazy times that we now live in, and how the speed of change that organizations are dealing with, is going to be pretty tricky.
Very tricky indeed. And your focus on like the complexity of leadership today is a really, really important one. I think in many ways over the last several years, we've had to rethink what effective leadership looks like, what an effective organization looks like, what effective strategy looks like. And a lot of things that maybe we took for granted, or we just kind of assumed, or it kind of had been the way it always had been, and so we just keep doing it that way, all of that had to be reevaluated. And I know that makes life uncomfortable for leaders, but I think it's also healthy in many ways, because we've been able to challenge assumptions. We've been able to stop doing things that, didn't serve us anymore. So in the strategy piece, in many organizations had to be completely redone. Oh, in some places almost from scratch, like completely reworking, like, what do we do? How do we do it? Why do we do it this way? All of that's been a painful but healthy process, I think, for most organizations. I want to get into this idea of values aligning with our strategy. Let's talk about the difference between core values and aspirational values, and then we can talk about how we can work towards better alignment.
Yeah. Look, I think that distinction around core values and aspirational is one of the most powerful conversations we can have as an organization if we want to actually start to see the power of what clarity around values can be. Because for so long, when values came up as a conversation in a business context, they were quite token and not really done as a deep or reflective exercise that was tapping into what actually was unique about us, what was non-negotiable, and just core to who we were as people within that organization. And they were conversations more around, the pieces that we were putting on a poster on a wall, and it was words like, integrity and honesty and all these generic pieces, which don't speak to what makes us different. They don't give guidance to our employees around how we actually behave or what it is that is important to us as an organization. And so the distinction around core values versus aspirational helps us get the benefits of a values conversation, that people then trust us more and understand us more, and see reflected in our behavior those things we're professing as our values. So if I give you a starting point, if you like, particularly if it sparks their interest and they want to dig in a little bit more, the best writing I've seen around making the distinction is Patrick Lencioni's work in The Advantage. So he talks about 4 different types of values, but if we just focus on core and aspirational values is a great conversation to have as an organization, because it's where we say, what are the values that would need to be present for us to succeed in the future? So we know that we're going to need them, but if we're honest with ourselves, they don't actually show up naturally in the way we currently behave or how we operate as an organization. And it's important to think about that from a strategic point of view, because we should be looking forward and projecting forward to how do we want to be in the future? Where do we want to grow and change? And how will we need to show up to be competitive in that way? But when we're then honest with that and we frame them as aspirational, not as core, internally with our team or our investors, externally with our customers and those interacting with us, people will be able to understand that, because we can say, here's what we know we need to be to succeed in the future. We're not there yet, but here's how we're going to go about, in Horizons, working towards having that as part of how we behave and show up in the world. So it's a more honest reflection of acknowledging what we need to be, but not claiming it to be present already. Because the problem that occurs when we take those kind of aspirational pieces and we start to say they are our core values is, even if it's not conscious for people, they start to have this, that's interesting. Bessi's claiming that as a core value, and I can't say I've ever seen that reflected in how she's making decisions or how she shows up in the world. So we actually start to lose trust, and it takes away from the very exercise we were trying to do. So I think that's why they're important to distinguish the two. And core values from an organizational perspective are pieces that are innate. They've always been there. They're part of who you are. And as I said, they're non-negotiable. You wouldn't just say, oh, okay, it's not really comfortable today, or we're going to lose that client if we stick to it, so we're happy to give it up. They're fundamentally already present and demonstrated in how you show up and behave. And I think that what connects this back to our earlier part of the conversation in terms of being aligned and having sustainability in even how we show up as an organization or as a leader becomes more possible when we've named those things and we actually respect and honor that they are fundamental to what is important to us and how we do behave, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the trust piece that you identified, I think that's really critical, and it's worth kind of double clicking on for a minute.
Yeah.
Because I appreciate aspiration, so, and I hold grace for people who are trying their best. We're all human. We're all imperfect. I think most people wake up in the morning trying to just go about their day, do the best they know how. I don't think most people have nefarious intentions or trying to like hurt people explicitly or anything like that. Like, I think most people are just trying to do the best they know how, but we all have our human foibles. And so we all have aspirations that we don't live up to. That's the deal. That's part of humanity. I get that. And I appreciate people being forward looking enough to have aspirations, that they're not just satisfied with the status quo. They know that they should be pushing and growing and trying to develop. I appreciate all of that. But you're absolutely right. When we state an aspirational value as a core value, people aren't dumb. Like, people see, they experience, they see what you do, how you make decisions, they see how you interact with other people, and they know whether or not you're living what you say is a core value or not. And in your mind, you may be thinking, no, but I'm trying my very best. That's great. And I give you grace for that. But that's different than actually doing the things you say are at your core. And people lose trust very quickly for leaders who don't walk the walk. So if you're espousing all these things and you're not doing them, people will give you grace to a point, but they're going to lose trust in you. An easy way to avoid this problem is to simply be more clear about what we mean by the values that we hold and that we're striving but we're also realistic with where we're at, and we're not, we're not going to gaslight people around, what we say our values are versus what the lived experience of the people around us is.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that has definitely changed in the last few years and is only increasing is that many of the aspects that you mentioned before around some of these shifts that have occurred in the last few years in the market come down to the things you used to be able to get away with, where it was enough to state that you cared about something or that as an organization you were doing something. It's no longer enough to just make a statement and not back it up. It's no longer acceptable to customers or employees even that there isn't an alignment between what you're saying and what you're doing. And so one of the best ways for you to start to be received better internally with employees and externally with customers is to just tune in and be more intentional with the language you use and how you position things in this area. Because as you said, people will show you grace and understand things if you're actually being more open and honest about it. And if we want to get better as an organization, then framing something as aspirational, describing what it is we're hoping to do to get better at that. When someone sees you doing something that isn't in line with that, they now almost have a different approach and permission to speak to you and go, it's interesting. You've just made this new decision around how you've been presenting yourselves in the market, but I don't see the connection between where you said you wanted to get to. But they'll feel able to have that conversation with you in a different way because you've said, we're learning in this area, we're trying to get better. You haven't framed it as this is something that we've mastered and it's who we are. So we will be given more grace and will actually be given more guidance in the process rather than people just quietly disconnecting from us, which is often the most damaging because we don't even know why they've gone silent, but actually it's because they've judged us in the process.
Yeah. So if we want to create better buy-in to achieving together that aspiration, being clearer in the language we use is going to be really powerful, just as you said. Let's talk now a little bit about now connecting this with strategy. So we have kind of the lived experience of our actual core values, we have our aspirational values, and we have like our actual business practices, what's happening today versus kind of our overarching strategy and where the horizon planning and like where we see ourselves going in a year, 2 years, 5 years, whatever. And that's a dynamic process. So how do you start to connect the two and how do you start to align them so that we're not, like, I don't know, squirrels like attention going every which direction and compromising what we otherwise would hold as a very important core value or at least an aspirational value?
So for me, a lot of that comes down to that right from those initial conversations and exploring what is important to us as an organization. How do we want to show up? How do we behave and make decisions? And what do we want to be part of in the world in terms of that vision or future place? Much of that exploration has to keep coming back to reminding ourselves, and in some cases, doing some unlearning about how we've previously thought about business. Because if we go all the way back to this idea of how do we merge money and meaning, how do we bring them back together, we often stay in that jumping in different directions because we have each of these categories in their own little silo and nothing is interconnected or woven in. So my approach to do that and to connect these ideas into your strategy is to always be saying, we want to be creating this beautiful self-reinforcing loop in our business where we're unapologetic about the fact that we want to make money and that the business needs to be financially stable and that those aspects are critical. But we also are unapologetically pursuing running the business in a way and making decisions in a way that align with what we care about and what's important to us as an organization. So when we're bringing those two things back together, we keep designing and shaping our business until they are both present and we're not doing this trade-off of, well, we're going to have to put on pause the things we care about or what we believe in and value in the world until we make enough money, and then we'll just give a little donation or we'll set up a foundation. We're separating out those ideas of money and meaning the strategic approach and the angle that gives you those competitive advantages that we touched on at the beginning is to always reconnect those ideas and say, okay, if we've said we care about our team's well-being, for example, and if we've said that's really important to us, how do we tie that into the way we run the business so that in strengthening our support and the culture we've created for our team, it actually has the self-reinforcing loop piece where it generates better outcomes for our clients because we have this team who are feeling great about work, they're settled at home, they're not feeling stressed and under pressure. So they get better results for our clients. They stay working with us for longer. So we drop our costs around recruitment and the retention and all of the aspects of training. We have this beautiful cycle that actually reduces our costs in the back end, increases our revenue in the front end of our business, all because we've connected those aspects of what we care about and not just seen it as an expense, but said, how do we make the decision and really connect these things back together and not say, oh, it would be bad to try to make money off that because it's just the right thing to do, or that's meant to be a contribution. So we'll just spend some money and allocate budget for it. Being strategic is connecting those things back together and really designing your business model in a way where they reinforce each other, where you're not having to pick the either or.
Avoiding the either or, I think, is really important. One example, I was having a conversation with somebody else the other day. I'm a professor, so I'm in higher education. I do consulting work on the side, things like this podcast on the side. But my main gig is I'm a professor. I've been a professor for about 16 years. And I was talking with someone who was lamenting kind of the corporatization of higher education, of universities. And the question was asked, what do you think about a university being run like a business? I'm like, well, that's a loaded question. Like there's a ton to unpack there. And I kind of like don't accept the premise of the question. So, I mean, from my perspective, and this is what I told this individual, from my perspective, it's not about whether it's a institution of higher education or a for-profit business or a government agency or a nonprofit, an NGO, whatever, right?
Agree.
To me, it's how organizations run, how organizations function. And there's successful, healthy organizations, and there are unsuccessful, unhealthy organizations. There are sustainable organizations, there are unsustainable organizations. I have zero problem with a university running like a quote unquote business if the business we're using as an example is a mission driven, purpose driven, healthy, sustainable organization. I think that's amazing. And I don't think there's anything uniquely like amazing or wonderful about how institutions of higher ed are run. There are many toxic organizations within higher ed. So it's like it's a false dichotomy. It's not like one's okay and the other's bad. It's about how do we put together organizations? How do we work together as teams? And that's the frame that I brought to that conversation, which I think was probably the first time that individual had ever thought that way. And I think we get too caught up in throwing stones at from the kind of more progressive side, maybe we're throwing stones at corporations. From the more conservative side, maybe we're throwing stones at higher ed or nonprofits or something like that. Like it's a bit silly. I think what we all want is good, healthy, effective, sustainable organizations that treat people with dignity and respect. That also, they have to have revenue, they have to make money in order to stay afloat, to make payroll, to like continue to exist. So you have to have that too, but it's not an either or. It's not like you can either be like this dirty money grubbing corporation that exploits the environment and exploits its people and consumers, or you're this super nice, fluffy nonprofit that never thinks about money and just provides free services to people all the time. Like that's a silly dichotomy, and it doesn't really exist in the
true.
world.
Yes, exactly. It doesn't actually reflect how things work. And I think it goes back to the aspect that we mentioned before of it's those unconscious and unquestioned beliefs around the purpose of business, or where conversations go to this. Is it a for-profit or a non-profit? Is it this or is it that? the truth is that all of those ideas around the purpose of business being this one-dimensional aspect of profit maximization came into and became just accepted as truth in the 70s, with Friedman and others talking about shareholder primacy and all of these different ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But the roots of business, if we go actually back into how deeply human it is to have trade and commerce and bartering and craftsmanship and all of these aspects, are who we are as people. And we have been so surrounded by this unquestioned aspect and demonizing of business because of ideas that have really only taken hold in these last few decades. Now, they've done a lot of damage in that time, but it's not a given, and it hasn't actually played out to be true. And again, people can read and look into different aspects that the businesses where there is just a one-dimensional obsession with profit maximization haven't actually outperformed. And given the changes we've now seen and the realities of the operating environment that we're all in, they absolutely will not be the winners over the long term. So it's a limited way of thinking anyway. And as you said, it doesn't reflect the reality of what occurs. And it's why we need to shift out of being so unconscious and just taking these ideas on, and to instead say, okay, actually, it's irrelevant what legal structure you have. All of those pieces are not the question. If we bring back this idea of the purpose of business not being profit maximization, but instead focus on the ideas of value. So I always say, when we look at the purpose of business, you need to know the value you bring as an organization. You need to understand the value customers want, and then you capture value in return. So if we think of the cycle, it's like, okay, unless we're delivering results, we're not going to drive revenue. That type of business that's driven from that place should in no way be uncomfortable or feel bad about making more money, because you've only made more money on the back of delivering more value. So a shift in how we're even thinking about and what we take responsibility for in the making of the money allows us to then not actually be creating those cycles that you spoke about, where we've made money by taking advantage of someone, or, like, that doesn't have to be the choice that we have in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has just been a really great conversation, Bessi. I appreciate it. And first thing in the morning for you, even more impressive. I know at the time I need to let you go and get on with your busy day, but before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, sure. So best place to go is just to my website, bessigraham.com, and we can share the link there. But on the site, what I would love for you to do, if you want to explore a little bit more, is to download. I've got a free resource there around the 5 steps to reclaiming decisive leadership, where I go into 5 of the areas of questions you need to be able to answer and think about as a leader in business. And also we have a free masterclass that we run around merging money and meaning. So all of the information, though, is in that one place. So just go to the website and you can also connect with me there. I would love to answer any questions and dig in with people who are curious to explore how we actually use business more effectively as that powerful agent for change in the world.
I love it. Thank you, Bessi. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Bessi can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.